Okay, we are live for the TeenPact Alumni Network. Welcome to Equip. What are we doing today? Well, Equip is an ongoing series of micro trainings that we want to offer through the TeenPact Alumni Network, where we're going to bring you interviews with industry professionals in the fields of leadership and business and career planning, discipleship, and more. We want to educate and inspire you with valuable information and training that will advance your education, career, and spiritual development. So if you want to stay up to date on what's happening within the network, you can check this group often. And you can also sign up for email notifications. To do that, just visit teenpactalumninetwork.com for more information. If I haven't met you, my name is Quinn Cools. After participating in high school with TeenPact as a student, I volunteered for a while and then have been working for TeenPact for the last 9 years. I now serve as the Vice President of Operations, but enough about me. You're not here for the host, you're here for our guest, who I'm going to be interviewing today. And that's Andy Kaufman, who's a recognized expert on leadership and project management. He's the president of the Institute for Leadership Excellence and Development, Inc., which helps organizations around the world improve their ability to lead and deliver. And in addition to running the Institute, Andy works with leaders at the United Nations to improve their ability to deliver on their initiatives. And among the many wonderful roles and responsibilities that Andy has, he also happens to be a TeenPact dad. So thanks for joining us, Andy.
Yeah, that should be at the front of the bio right there, Quinn. Absolutely.
Well, in many ways, I feel like your time in TeenPact has been, the Clark Kent to your Superman. In TeenPact, you're working with me at a national convention, hauling water around to fields to make sure that people stay hydrated. And, but then you put the cape on back home first and foremost with your family. But then in a lot of other spheres, you do podcasting, you've done, you've written a lot, you teach MBA classes. I mean, there's a lot that you're doing. So what's your favorite thing that you do in all that?
Well, it's being dad and husband for sure. I mean, I'm not just saying that. I mean, right before we got started, my kids were pulling a prank on me. They were going to have some like alarm go off in the background. And I mean, we just have a lot of fun, but all of us, in fact, the people that are listening, I'm sure you can all relate. You wear so many hats, and it's only going to be more hats as you continue in your career. And learning to put on new hats, it can be uncomfortable at times to put on a new hat. Right? When you stepped into the VP role, Quinn, I'm sure it's like, oh man, yeah. In fact, it's a very normal thing to feel inside, like I think I'm over my head. Right?
Oh yeah. So I had a conversation with Lily Shanks, who was a longtime director and served in state classes and whatnot here at TeenPact, and I said, Lily, I do not feel ready for this, and she's like, nope, like this is the next step for you. This is good. Like the organization's ready, you're ready. Like she was great at encouraging me and passing that on.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, when you grow up in TeenPact, like I did, you have the opportunity to present, in front of the students. You have the opportunity to lead discussions in various settings. You might even run for office. And so, one of the things you learn is, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, but sometimes that might not be completely true. It does matter what you say, right? Yeah. It matters a lot. But there's also a phrase, it's not just what you know, it's who you know. And I think that would be one that could kind of kick us off here. It does matter what you know, but today's discussion, we're talking about the other side of that, who you know, the importance of relationships. So, first of all, let me ask you, why is networking through relationships, why is the relationships part where we're starting with this all? And then as you're thinking about that, if you're joining us today live, there is a comment section, and we would welcome you to go ahead and put in some questions or comments there that you'd like to pass along to Andy and myself. And at the end, if we have some time, we might get to a couple questions. But Andy, the importance of relationships, just to kick us off.
Yeah, I feel like I wasn't taught this in school, Quinn. I feel like what you learn in school is, the person with the highest grade wins, right? Or the person that's in the most activities or whatever. But if relationships came up at all, it's like, who do you sit next to maybe,
right? Yeah.
See their grades, whatever. But the fact is, that it really is the dirty little secret of business, that although it's not taught in schools often, it is the fact that who we know can make a big difference. Now, like you said, it's not what you know, it's who you know. It does matter what you know, right? It does matter. But I
Sure.
just see it time and time again that relationships can make things go much more smoothly. I know I spend most of the time, of most of my days working with people trying to develop their project management skills and their leadership skills. With project management, if people have good relationships, they're more likely to get information about how the project is going. If there's trust in the relationship and there's a basis of relationship, if there's a good relationship, you can check in on people. But if there's not a good relationship, you're checking up on them. That's how it feels. So almost every aspect of business, and then you could even just go into life for sure, relationship with neighbors, relationships in our churches, with our pastors, with our small group leaders, with the people we shepherd as small group leaders. In so many ways, it all comes down to relationships.
Yeah, and I see that there's like a distance that gets created, or maybe it already exists naturally, and you have to like bridge the gap.
Yeah.
And if you're not intentional about bridging the gap, then it's never going to be there. I can think of relationships with people I work with or with my pastor where like, no, I trust this person implicitly, but that's because I have like an 8 or 10 year history of doing life together and seeing each other regularly and sharing vulnerable things with one another. And like, I kind of subconsciously don't even realize though that there's been a lot of relationship building. I'm just like, no, that person's trustworthy, of course.
Well, I love that, Quinn, because you don't have a check mark go relationship build today, right? It's just you've just learned that that's something you do naturally. But here's what I found is we don't drift towards that. We actually drift away from it. And there are a lot of people just over these last 2 years that have just drifted away from relationships because we're not on the same floor at work, or depending on where they live, maybe they didn't gather at church, or maybe they didn't get together with friends in the same sort of way. And so we actually drift, if we're not careful, we drift away from this. We don't drift towards greater intimacy, greater depth of relationships. We drift away from it.
Yeah, and I think in like perhaps in business and project management, which is your area of expertise, people maybe get into just like high efficiency mode.
Right.
And, if I just do X number of tasks and just more and more and more, then more equals better. But I'd like for us to talk a little bit about the quality of relationships, the types of people that you get to know, because it's not just doing, it's a presence, it's a relationship that you're building. Could you just kind of speak to the importance of who you build those relationships with?
Yeah, you don't want to get utilitarian about it. Like, I'm only going to hang with people who are going to make me better. But I think we all know some examples of people who we do feel energized when we spend time with them, right? Like we spend time with them and they're like, they challenge me. It's not just that they reinforce what I want to believe. It's just, man, they inspire me. So it is worth thinking through who should I spend more time with? And, one of the cool things about Christ is one of the things that really ticked off people about him is who he spent time with. So it wasn't just the elite, right? And so I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there is something about who we become who we surround ourselves with. So there's a study called the Terman study that looked at people from youth to death. So over decades. And they tried to control for as many things as possible. Was it the wealth of their family? Was it the schools they went to? Was it how elite their companies were? What seemed to make the difference between those people that ended up being more successful as they define success, which might not be the same way we define success. But what is it that as they controlled for as many things as they could, one of the biggest findings out of the Terman study is we become like the people we surround ourselves with. And you can see that professionally. Now, for example, if I spend time with people who are rather sarcastic, it becomes a gift for me. Like I can start being that way, right? If I spend time with people who work long hours, I can probably drift more towards that. If I spend time with people who are like dads who are really seriously trying to take their role, and it inspires me to be more like that. So there's plenty of research that backs up we're surrounded by who surrounds us. We start to become. Jim Rohn said we're the mean of the 5 people we spend the most time with, which anyone listening to us right now either feels inspired or frightened by that statement. But it is worth thinking, like, who does challenge us? And then on the other side of it, who is it that we can be pouring into?
Yeah. Right.
I find the more I teach or help mentor, it actually helps me as well. And so being more intentional, we, once again, on the drift metaphor, maybe we just kind of drift towards the people that are easiest to be with. So a London Business School professor, Herminia Ibarra, who says that left our own devices, we build networks that are narcissistic and lazy, which is just to say, we tend to build relationships with just people who are like us and easy. So it's worth being intentional about it.
So it's easy for me to accept you should be intentional with your relationships, you know, that's going to define who you're becoming over, you know, years in your life. I've heard on the other side of that, people being so selective, or almost looking at it like, you know, a constant strategy of like, oh, if I get in with this person, and it almost becomes like coercive, if I can use that word, like, you know, and it's just overly strategized. Could you kind of speak to how do you weigh, okay, I want to build relationships with people who have influence in this area, or I want to learn from these different people, but I don't feel like I have much to offer. That just seems like a hard thing to travel. I don't know. You have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I like to think of it as it's not 0-100. So it's not going to be all this and none of that. I like to think of it as like, I can think of somebody right now who I so admire this guy. I want to spend more time with them. So it's not about, I'm going to spend 0 with that person. Like I've got a policy with very few exceptions, not to unfriend people. Like, even if it feels like they're a troll on social media, because there's something I can learn from them. Right. And but I mean, if somebody's truly toxic or somebody's truly bullying, whether in the workplace, in the neighborhood or whatever, sure. But I like to think of it as less about 0, more about maybe a little less there, a lot more with these are some key people that, man, when I spend time with him, I feel like he challenges me in a good way. And I think we can all think of people like that.
Yeah, that's really good. So I've heard you talk about a couple concepts, the inner circle, go to the group. Could you tell us a little bit more about the importance of building relationships around you that are intentional and healthy and good and, you know, directionally positive and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, this actually came from a guy named Keith Ferrazzi. He wrote a book, Never Eat Alone, and Who's Got Your Back, and so all of it's relationship based. And he talks about it's critical to have the inner circle, and then there's the go-to group. The inner circle doesn't have to have many people, but these are people that you can be, to pick a relevant topic, without a mask. Okay, and we're not talking about cloth here. We're talking about I can be completely who I am. I could call them in the middle of the night and they'd pick up the phone, you know, that sort of thing. The interesting thing in Keith's book, they talks about, he says, I don't remember the percentage, Quinn, but it was a strikingly high percentage of people who don't have anyone in the inner circle. Like they don't feel like they can be real. And many of those people were married. So what's that mean? Like, I can't even be real to my spouse. And so that's a dangerous place for any of us to be in. Even Jesus had his kind of inner circle, and then the full disciples, and then out, right? And so there's this element of who is it that I can really, like, they'll tell me what I need to know. Like you know, the old phrase, they'll tell me when my breath is bad, that sort of thing. And then the go-to group, it could just be, I mean, it can be wide. So if, you know, this is a confusing time, I think, in the financial world. So who do you have that you can go to and go, how does someone invest? How does someone invest? Like, let's say someone's early in their career. What do they do right now? How do they set themselves up? Do you have a financial mentor? Do you have a spiritual mentor? Do you have someone? I mean, it's a confusing time healthcare wise with people so polarized on things. Do you have some different voices there? So that's the idea of having these groups. And sometimes people go, well, I've got Google. There's so much bias there, and there can be bias in these relationships too. But having the people you go to, flesh. I want to talk to flesh.
Yeah. So I'm picking up this idea that you really need to build quality relationships with people around you. And there's a part of that where I'm hearing like, you're not really in it because they're going to connect you to something.
Right.
You're in it for a relationship that's going to be a supportive framework for just life and decisions and, you know, future and all that kind of stuff. So there is a directional component to this, right? Like there's an idea with networking where, hey, I want to be somewhere different 3 years, 5 years in my career, or, in a particular, degree or something like that. And you want to connect with the right people that can help kind of pave that path. Are there strategies that you would suggest about kind of how to network through relationships?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound really trite, I think, but I have found there's value in learning how to small talk. And what I mean by that is sometimes just learning to start conversations with people. So whether it's at college, whether it's with standing in line somewhere. My dad, who just recently died, one of the things, there's so many things I love about just the way he lived his life, but one of them was he never met a stranger. And he was not an extrovert. That's the interesting thing. He was never the loudest one in the room, but he'd always be curious and just learn how to small talk and ask questions. It's remarkable to me how sometimes, and I bet people listening to this can think of examples where they struck up a conversation, not because there was any strategy. This was not do you know who they are? And all of a sudden that led to, they were able to help them or they were able to help you. And so you don't do it for that reason, but just learn to start having conversations with people. And Keith Ferrazzi says, are you the kind of person that people want to be around? What people want to be around usually is people who are interested in you, right? And so it's like, am I asking questions and things like that? A strategy that I found can be helpful for, let's say, people in the workplace. And I got this from Hermione Ibarra. Her book is called Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. She says most of our relationships are backward looking, like who have we worked with in the past? But let's say someone is relatively new in the workplace and they kind of want to go in this direction, like you said. Well, who is it that's out there? Who is it that is, in departments that I might need to interact with? And so I haven't yet, but I'm going to start building relationships. So I actually recommend to coaching clients, just make a list and don't hesitate to put an aspirational person or two on that list. Like people that you're like, they'll never get back to me. Because I've got all kinds of stories of people that thought somebody wouldn't get back to them, but that people did, and that led to opportunities. So just, make a list. Who is it I want to spend a little bit more time with? Maybe you chip away at it. Set the bar low. Once a month, I'm going to have lunch or coffee or a Zoom or, something with somebody on that list, and just be ready to ask some questions, little things like that. I find it's helpful to, in our contacts list, after you meet with somebody, just take a couple notes. Just most contact systems will have a field, free-form text. You can just put some notes, just little things like that, because I want to remember these things about people, Quinn. But until I get like a USB port, like right here, this is the ultimate brain. Yeah. And so I think it's a pretty common thing now. Just take some notes. They're going to go to Florida for a vacation. So the next time I interact with them, hey, you're going to go to Florida. Now that may seem superficial, but I want to remember those things. And it's not stalking. It's just what, I want to make sure that they are remembered and seen and heard and, captured that way.
That's really good. I've pushed against those sorts of tools just subconsciously, I think, where I feel like, oh, that's not, the soft relationship stuff. That's like hard data tracking stuff or whatever. But it's like, it is a tool that's meant to enhance the relationship and continue, about your family or about that trip to Florida. And so that's really good. And I want us to think about that a little bit more if you have a moment. And that would just be, so if you're trying to move in a particular direction, let's say, you're getting kind of burnout with the current job that you're in, or you're considering a career shift completely, what would be the first steps of, gosh, I don't even know what I don't know. Like, is it getting to know people in different departments? Is it, looking up people on LinkedIn and saying like, who does this job? That looks interesting. Like, where would you direct people? Because, I want to circle the wagons with relationships, but how do you start making those connections?
Yeah. Well, something that I feel like I've had stressed to me many times is you always have to dig the well before you're thirsty. So if you're already at a point where I want to get out of here, it is a little late to start. So it is something about this should be ongoing, something to think about that. But something that it was helpful for me was there was a point at which I think I might want to make a living doing this. So this is before I started my business. And so, but I wasn't sure, like, is this something I feel like God's leading me to do? Do I feel like this is gifting? Do I, but you want to kind of figure it out. You want to at least experiment with it or research it a little bit. So I tried to find people who are like 5 to 10 years ahead of me. and it might be harder to reach out to the 10-year, but even somebody's like 5 years ahead in a role that I might want to be. And just, it's something like, I'm amazed how accessible people are, how willing they are to share. So I reached out to people who are professional speakers. I'm like, what do you do? How do you do it? What are the forms you use? How do you get business? Quinn, I could not believe how willing people were to share the information. And people are willing to share. Like, I like to ask, what do you not like about your job? You're like, because that's really good to know, because something may seem gloriously interesting, but what they don't realize is what goes on behind the scenes. And so, yeah. So there's the whole lean movement suggests that if you get an idea of what you want to do, the next thing to do is, what is the quickest and least expensive way to find out if that's really something of interest? And almost always it ends up being conversations. Like in the book, Designing Your Life, they say, I won't get the quote right, but it's the easiest prototype is a conversation. So instead of trying to figure out exactly what you're going to do, start having conversations with people. And that's networking. And you might go, okay, I don't think they're a very good commercial for what I want to do. Maybe I'll need to talk to somebody else, but still, it's not wasted. I just love in God's economy. Exactly. Nothing is wasted. Like that relationship can lead you on to something else. It is remarkable.
Yeah. We were talking about some of the tools that you can use in the way of connecting. You're pretty active on LinkedIn. Can you kind of speak to that or other resources that you like to utilize?
Especially for the people that are recently out of TeenPact, in college, or soon to be in the workplace. I don't think it's a surprise to them that they should be on LinkedIn. It's just really the standard way. When you go for an interview, people are probably going to look at your LinkedIn profile. And so it is worth really thinking that through. But the biggest reason, I think, the average person, the only time they go into LinkedIn beyond setting up their profile is because they get an invite to connect. And so they go in and they either accept it or not. And then they go out and they don't touch LinkedIn again until they get the next invite. They're not really tapping into the value of it. And I think the biggest value is how accessible people are. So whatever someone's industry is, who are some people that they just seem to be not influencer in the Instagram-y sort of way, but they're just like thought leaders. Like if there's a book you read that you think is interesting, it's amazing how accessible people are. And depending on the book, if it's more business focused, they're probably on LinkedIn. But I've gotten responses back from people like I never thought would be able to get back to. So
that's incredible.
Follow them, just like what they do. You don't have to interact with them. Just then maybe slowly start commenting, and then eventually connect more. It's just remarkable how accessible people are. So certainly it's like an online resume, but it is really so much more than that.
That's really good. Okay. Well, that's great. We have a couple of questions that have come in. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up and see what we've got here. So here's one question. Is it acceptable to approach someone with a prior introduction to learn about their career, job, or industry? And if acceptable, how is the best approach without being annoying? So kind of exactly what you're talking about, but maybe tag on how do you not be annoying about that connection?
Yeah. So what is it that makes someone feel annoyed, do you think? And so I think that's something for us to consider. And I think sometimes what feels annoying is if somebody's just, if their opening seems to be they're trying to get something from you, like they're just doing it to try to get something from you. And so, I think the biggest hesitation, quite frankly, isn't that. I think it's that people are like, oh, they'll never say yes. No, I could reach out to them, but they won't say yes. And I learned this from interviewing a woman named Carrie Mirabal, I believe it's pronounced, Mirabal. And her name of her book, you don't even need any more than the name of the book. It is, You Already Have the No. And her point is, if you don't ask, you've got to know. If you ask and they say no, it's no different. And so make the ask. I'd say that's often the biggest thing that people in their career are afraid to do. Make the ask. But when you make the ask, something I like to say is something along the lines of this. I respect, based on what I know about you, I really respect these things here. I'm new in my career. I have a lot to learn. I would love to buy you a coffee, or I'd love to buy you lunch and ask you some questions just to learn more from your experience. So the ask is really, and by the way, you should pay for the coffee or the lunch, right? But
yeah, that's good.
And if somebody's right out of college, they'll probably pay for you anyway. But still, the point is that make that offer of, I just want to glean from your experiences. That is, I mean, flattery in the best sense of the word to that person.
Yeah.
They'd be like, I would be glad to do that. And then you can
Yeah.
ask them questions like, what are things you know now that you didn't know back when when I'm at my position? What are some of the key decisions you made over the course of your career? For women, because sometimes it's hard to find good, like strong role models at certain levels. It might be like, what have you learned about being a woman at that level that would be helpful for me to know? Just
So good.
how do you model your faith in the position you're in? Just asking questions like that. It really is. Once again, people are often more accessible, and that would not be an annoying to
Yeah.
most.
Yeah. And given that this is a resource, this live interview format is a resource for the Alumni Network, I'll just give a plug. I think the Alumni Network is going to be full of a lot of people that are eager to give and mentor and share information. And, there's such a shared interests and values within the TeenPact demographic that, gosh, if you're going into a particular industry or considering a job change or any thousand of things, there's going to be opportunities. So that's really good. We have one more question. Could you give perhaps a recent example of a professional working relationship that you observed maybe drifting away from you, maybe somebody else distancing themselves? And how would you determine next steps and options if you observed that?
Yeah, I can maybe think from my first thought is maybe somebody who from a client relationship where it used to be maybe warmer and it feels like they're not responding to emails. So without giving any client names or anything like that, I think an easy thing for us to forget is giving other people the benefit of the doubt. So where I think we can get annoying sometimes if we're like, all right, I emailed you yesterday, I'm emailing you again today, what's going on? So sometimes just giving some space. I think there's just a lot that people are going through. Like I just had a conversation with somebody who she's just taking a leave because she goes, from a mental health perspective, this has just been too hard over the course of these last 2 years. So the way I like to think of it is it's usually not personal. So if they're drifting away, if my opening position is maybe they don't like me, maybe whatever, maybe I did something wrong. We often beat ourselves up. So what if the opening position is there might be something else going on? Instead of trying to build the relationship or a sale or something like that, maybe just reach out and say, hey, I haven't heard from you. I hope you're doing okay. How have you and your family navigated COVID? Or something just on the human side of it, not business or professional or sales for sure. Just I found a lot of value in making sure that it's almost like a check-in. Just you've come to mind, and if they're another follower of Christ, it might be just one of those things. Man, you came to mind. Like, is there any way I can be praying for you? Just not forgetting the human side of it, because too often I know in project management we start treating people like resources, and salespeople start thinking of their prospects, and we forget the whole human side of it.
Yeah, and that kind of brings the conversation full circle where you were earlier talking about checking in on somebody as opposed to checking on them, and it's like that's a totally different way of viewing it, when you're viewing to, build into the relationship and including those, those personal, life things. So that's really, really good. So as we wrap up here, you've hosted a podcast for a number of years and hosted, numerous authors and different things. Could you, maybe give some direction for what are some of the best books on this topic, resources that, our viewers could maybe go back and find on Amazon or another, local bookseller?
Yeah, I mentioned Keith Ferrazzi's books. It's specifically less about Never Eat Alone and more, I think, his book, Who's Got Your Back? I think that would be a really good one because I feel like that one is deeper about relationships. And he talks about leading with gratitude. What's annoying is when somebody seems to be entitled. And so when you're leading with gratitude and building relationships, I think there's a great value in that book. And then Devorah Zack, I'm pretty sure it's Z-A-C-K, Devorah Zack, but she wrote a book that's easy to remember, Networking for People Who Hate Networking is the name of the book. And she was just a scream to talk to in the interview, but her book is funny. And it's inspiring actually for those that feel like, I get that networking is important, but I just don't like doing it. And so Networking for People Who Hate Networking would be a good one.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe you could describe the podcast a little bit, because I know Peter Martin was the first one that introduced it to me. He loves listening to it, and will pass along different episodes. I listened to the most recent one that was excellent. But tell our listeners about kind of what you do with the podcast.
Yeah, the whole goal is, what are some resources that are out there that help us lead and deliver? So when it comes to, you can't go to a leadership class and go, look, I got a certificate, I'm a leader now. It's something that you do over time. And so podcasts are a great format for that. So I try to find interesting people that have, unique ideas. And so whether it is leading teams or delivering projects, that's the idea of the people in the project. So we're soon to be releasing episode 348. And it has been such a learning journey. I'm learning right along with the listeners.
Yeah. Well, we're only like 12 episodes in on the TeenPact podcast. We've got a lot to learn. So I might reach out to you about some questions.
Good networking. Right?
Networking through relationship. Exactly.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for your generosity and providing this time. And for the listeners, thank you for engaging in the comments. And, for more of these sorts of resources, we're going to do more Equip interviews in the coming months. And so stay tuned for that. Andy, once again, thanks.
Thank you. And thanks to Carlin, too, for helping organize this.
Yeah, thanks, Carlin Sullivan.